Okay. Everybody see the screen? We all good? Okay. So, first of all, I want to talk about overcoming giants. I don't know about you guys, but last year I felt like every time I turned a corner, there was another giant right in front of me. There was something that I hadn't thought would happen. You know, it was like a Mack truck hit me. It was nothing simple and small. It was always something huge. As a group last year, these are some of the things we faced, which was a pandemic, constant riots, riots from Black Lives Matter to riots on the Capitol. So more than one cause or issue, high unemployment. I know I personally lost my biggest account. Their budget was frozen, so really I didn't have work. My son-in-law, being a gymnastics coach, could not coach because the gyms were shut down. I just, didn't know how deep the unemployment ran last year. Mental health issues were up. Suicide was up. There was a lot of people walking away from God. There were a lot of people that said they didn't understand why God would do this to us. And isolation. I saw people who were single people living alone that didn't have any human interaction for several months, and they were truly suffering. So, I mean, you look at this list, this is 6 giants that were easily listed from last year. This doesn't go into what our personal giants were, like with my father's health and a personal friend I know losing all her clients and no longer having her business. Another person who is facing foreclosure and bankruptcy. There's just so much. So what are we going to face in 2021? We don't know. We know some of the things I just spoke about are going to continue on, but we need to look at the light at the end of the tunnel. You know, we have a vaccine now that are helping our frontline workers and are helping our elderly and compromised health patients in the hospitals. And I know today both my parents are able to get their COVID vaccine at UT Southwestern because number 1, my dad has cancer. Number 2, my mom is diabetic. And there is a peace in my heart knowing that they're starting some protection. But as for that, we really don't know what's going to come up. When we sat here at the same day in 2020, I recall doing networking commercials, standing and saying 2020, the year of vision. I know Steve was battling vision issues at that time. And I mean, literally medical vision issues. And, that wasn't that long ago, but look at everything that's happened in that time. And most people I know are not looking fondly on 2020, and they're exuberant that we're in 2021. So I want to quickly retell the story of David and Goliath. I think we all know this story, but I'm going to very simply, in a huge overview, tell the story. And most of us know that the Philistines and the Israelites were at battle. They were each on a side of a hill with a ravine in between them. They were faced with a situation where they were going to do single combat, which meant one person from each side would come together and battle, and that would be who the winner would be. We do know that the Philistines had Goliath, who was a giant, and that's who they were sending to fight. And on the opposite side, King Saul asked for someone to step up and volunteer to fight the giant, and nobody did but David. And we want to talk about that today because, as we know, David was the successor and the winner, and we want to look at this story and see why was that. So the things that we know about David and Goliath in the story is, first of all David had to battle with was a sling and 5 rocks. So he had no weapons, but he was a shepherd. Now let's think, because Goliath had full armor, he had weapons, he was very much ready to do battle, and he was actually undefeated. He was their best warrior for the Philistines whenever they went to war. David was a young shepherd who had never been in battle. He was only there present because his father asked for him to take provisions to his brothers who were soldiers. And he stood up and said, I want to be the one to go against him. Now, King Saul said, you're inexperienced, you can't do this. But when there was no one else to battle and no one else who offered, he had no choice but to allow David to be the one to battle. And David did not want to wear the battle gear that King Saul wanted him to wear. He said he would not be able to move around. It was way too heavy. It didn't fit him, and he would not be able to accomplish what he needed to accomplish. So that being said, think of in the ravine, Goliath, fully suited and ready to go, and David in just a tunic, little shepherd, the shepherd stick, his slingshot, and his few small stones. You'd think David is such an underdog, but why is he doing this? And we want to stop and think about him being a shepherd and how that qualified him in his mind to fight Goliath, this huge giant, this thing that nobody else wanted to go against. And first of all, we know that shepherds had to protect their sheep, and there would be bears and lions that would come against them in a predatory situation. And there was a time that a lion came and took one of David's lambs and was in his mouth. And David had to be accurate with one shot to take that lion down to rescue that lamb. And if you think about shepherds, they practice constantly to be able to be a really good shot with their sling. And they did this by shooting birds out of the air at a far distance, or, shooting fruit off a tree. But they would learn to target something small and be able to hit it accurately. So we don't usually think about that, but that is part of his story. Another thing is the 5 stones that David picked up to use in battle actually were barium sulfate. That is the type of rock that was found just in that valley. And that had the same firepower as a 45 caliber bullet. So pretty big firepower from just a small stone. Goliath said to David as he taunted him, "Come to me." The thing was, Goliath did not know that David was a shepherd and that David was very accurate from far away. He didn't need to come close to battle, which was another great advantage for David. And so the Goliath could taunt him all he wanted and tell him, come to me, come to me. But David didn't respond that way because he didn't have to. Another thing is Goliath was over 9 feet tall. He most likely suffered from giantism. And this is an impairment that, number one, affects mobility. So Goliath would not have been able to move fast to get away from David or to see that shot coming. He didn't have the mobility to move quickly. He also, it was thought that from his giantism, that can sometimes cause tumors to press on the pituitary gland or the optic nerve, which would impair his vision. And if you remember the story of David and Goliath, David walked down the hill to the ravine with a shepherd's stick. Yet Goliath thought he had a couple sticks, and he kind of even taunted him by saying, "What do you think I am, a dog that you bring sticks to me?" So sometimes we see a giant, but we don't understand their shortcomings and their flaws, that we maybe are making them out bigger than what they should be. And the last thing is David always stayed focused and undistracted from his faith. He knew that God was with him in this battle, and he did not fear that God would leave him. And that is something that we need to just reflect on daily. When we see an issue or a giant or a problem come to us, maybe it's a huge medical bill that we didn't know was coming, or maybe it was a spouse that says, I'm leaving you. The first thing we need to do is say, this is maybe a giant, but God is with me. And so I will not fear, and I will take another look at this situation with a different set of eyes, just like what we're doing here with David and Goliath. So the information I just gave you came from a book by Malcolm Gladwell called David and Goliath, and it is an outstanding book. I highly recommend you read it because there's so many more thought-provoking details in that book that I have skimmed over because of time. Two other books that he has, you may be familiar with The Tipping Point. This book came out probably maybe 15 years ago. It's been quite a while ago. And it talks about how the smallest things can make the biggest changes. For example, there was a study done, I believe it was in the 70s or 80s, and they randomly asked 160 people all around the country to send a letter to a particular attorney in a particular city. And what they found was when these people sent the letter, now this is before cell phones, internet, email, all that, so it had to go snail mail, what we call snail mail today. They would send it, and the instructions they had is to get it to another person that would get it to the end place. So it was kind of like a chain thing. So if I mailed it and I knew that this man was in Massachusetts, but I couldn't mail it directly to him, I would need to find someone I could get it to that would have some kind of relationship to get it there. So maybe I know an attorney in Indiana that would also know an association, that would be able to move the letter further and to get it to the final destination. Of course, we know this is 6 degrees of separation. And they found that when they did all the numbers of where did each of these letters go, they found that it came down to the 3 people in common, and 3 people in common that actually knew the final recipient and were able to funnel all these to him. So it's a great book. It talks about how you can do the smallest action, yet make the greatest difference. And then the book in the middle, Talking to Strangers, is one I read probably a year ago. It talks about how we form an opinion of people very quickly. Within the first 7 seconds, we form an opinion, either by someone's color of their skin, by the first words they say, how they're dressed. And he really takes you through a process to step back and breathe before you start making those analysis. And so 3 great books I highly recommend if you're a reader. If not, they're all on Audible as well. So I want to ask you, do you think differently of David being the underdog? And do you think that you're evaluating your giants correctly? So when I always heard the story of David and Goliath, it was just about the underdog beating the giant. It really didn't offer any more explanation than that in my small-minded interpretation. So I presented that to you today to truly think differently and think of yourself as David and not as an underdog. So if you have a huge giant in front of you, maybe you're looking for a new career, I would ask you to sit quietly and make a list. What are the skills? What are the things you already have going for you that maybe you're not recognizing? Because this can make a huge difference in your success. I want to talk to you also about things that are holding us back and what is keeping us from defeating our giants. And I think most of you would say, number one, fear. Instead of trusting God, a lot of us, I included, will see what what the giant is, and all of a sudden I start thinking in my mind, what are my resources to beat this? What's my plan to beat this? How am I going to overcome this? And it's all about me. It was so self-defeating in conquering that giant. And I ask you to, again, stop, be patient, take a pause, take a breath, and say again, how would God want me to handle this? Would he want me to do this on my own? Or would he want me to turn to him for guidance? And we all know that fear and gratitude cannot live in the same place. So if we're practicing fear, we're not practicing gratitude. So we need to go to a place of, here is a giant in front of me. How can I be grateful that this has been presented to me? Where am I going to go? What am I going to learn from this? And if you've seen the 2 podcasts that I've done with Mark and overcoming his medical condition, you know, that's the biggest thing that he talks about, is he was asking God constantly, what are you bringing me through? How are you bringing me through? What am I going to get from this? You know, and I think if we can stop being human for a moment and thinking we can solve everything, and turn to God, I think that we can be comforted, we'll find peace. We also will move out of that fear of that giant. Another thing is our past disappointments that didn't do well. So a lot of times we will say to ourselves, you know, it didn't go right before, why would it go right this time? And this could be with something like finding a new career, or maybe even making a new friend. Maybe you've had a friendship or a relationship that you were all in, but the other person wasn't. And it just didn't end right. I mean, you still have some forgiveness you need to do for that, or maybe you can't see the other person's maybe insecurities that led to the breakup of this particular relationship. And, you know, it's okay to say, you know, I failed at that, and I'm fearful of doing that again and opening my heart. It's okay to do that, but we want to move past that as well. I think too, disapproval of others. You know, how many of us are always worried about, well, what is such and such going to think if I do this? Or, you know, is my reputation going to be compromised? You know, we worry about how others here, the broken humans on earth, are viewing us instead of how God is viewing us. You know, God sees us as perfect, yet we don't see ourselves in any way near that. We don't even normally see ourselves as average. We tend to look at our faults and our flaws and the opinions of others, and that's not how God sees us. And lastly, the opposition of others. How many times have you walked up to someone and said, I've got this great idea, I'm so excited, I'm going to start a new business, and then someone gives you the big barrage of, well, this isn't a good time to start because of COVID, and you know, that's going to just eat up your money, and you're going to end up broke. And I saw someone who tried to do that years ago and they failed. So many people will let others discourage them and talk them out of doing that big goal, or looking at that giant and saying, I can conquer it, because they are listening to others. So let's talk about what's holding us back and what we can do. So first of all, again, I did speak about fear and the practice of gratitude. They cannot live in the same place. And I'm going to tell you a quick story, and probably a lot of you guys have heard this story because it was a giant for me to conquer. And when I was in the Citizens Fire Academy, I had no idea that on one of the last days we were going to be put through a test that was exactly what the fire department had to test every single year physically, to stay as an active firefighter. And one of the things was you had to climb up on a fire truck and climb a 60-foot ladder straight up in the air in a parking lot. I am very, very fearful of heights. And you know, it ended up that I was the second to last person, probably out of 25 people, to climb this ladder, and I had to sit there and watch every single person climb all the way to the top like a little squirrel, ringing the bell, success, they made it, and scurry back down and go to the next task. And that's truly how I felt. I felt like a big old rabbit sitting there knowing I couldn't climb that tree like that squirrel could. And when it came my time, you had to walk or climb up onto the fire truck, which was like 8 feet to start with. And there was a firefighter at the base of that fire truck and one on top of the fire truck to assist you. And of course, they're going to harness you and everything so that you're safe. But that didn't matter in my mind because I was going to have to climb high in the air with really nothing but this tiny little harness around me. And remember, you had to be in full gear. So I had these boots, these coveralls and everything else, the hat. I did not wear the jacket because it was very encumbering. But I told both firefighters, listen, I'm going to be honest with you. I am not a climber. I know on the side of the truck where the ladder is going up, there's the letter A for Alan. I want you to know that's about 25 feet up there. If I make it that far, I want you to hoot and holler for me, and I want you to tell me I have done amazing, because my hands are shaking and I can barely put my foot on this first rung of this ladder. At this point, I'm about 14 feet up, and I still have the 60 feet to climb. This ladder is at an angle. It's a little bit windy that day. It's a beautiful day. The sun's out. And I take the first couple steps. And the first thing I do is say, God, this is up to you. I can't do this on my own. If I'm to make it up this ladder, it's going to be with you. And every step I took, I said, I know you're here. All right, Father, I got another step. You brought me this far. Keep me going. And honestly, to tell you, I made it 3/4 of the way up. I didn't make it to ring that bell, but I made it 3/4 of the way up. And if I ever have the opportunity again, I will scurry up that ladder like a squirrel because I'm no longer afraid. And that is because I trusted God instead of letting it run through my mind that I couldn't do it. Now, past disappointments that didn't end well, we all have those situations, but I want to tell you that failure is part of growth. You cannot grow without having disappointments and failures. And, only God knows the purpose why we're here. And a lot of times it doesn't align with what we think we should be doing. And we have to understand that. If you've not read the Purpose-Driven book, please read it, because what it says on the very first page is, this is not about you. This is about God and why God has chosen to put you on earth. We are here to do his work. So I know that I've had many, many disappointments in my life and many failures. And I'm finally at a point in my life that I can talk about them. I can be raw and exposed and organic, and I can tell my shame stories without being shameful or embarrassed anymore. And the one that I tell very often is my first marriage, that my husband became an alcoholic and was addicted to methamphetamine. And I had a very small daughter that I was trying to protect. I was trying to keep my family from knowing what was happening because I was living in Illinois and they were living down here. So I hid everything. And I struggled, and I had to finally come to the point to call my parents and say, I have to come clean about what's happening. Now, this was before I had a relationship with God. This probably would have totally been different if I had understood what faith was at that time, but I went to my parents because they were my only trusted confidants at the time and said, I have got to get out of this situation. This is not safe for myself, nor is it safe for my daughter. My husband would come home under the influence. He would be driving a truck. He was in a couple wrecks that he just left his truck and went and hid in the woods or, left the scene. He came home one night under the influence of methamphetamine, rolling around in my front yard, saying the devil's in him. It was horrifying. And here I had a small daughter, 3 or 4 years old, that basically I didn't know how to protect. And so I tell that story because people know where I am today. They know that once I found my faith and I gave it to God, honestly, within a few weeks' time, he blessed me with my husband, Wes. So don't be afraid of your disappointments. Don't be afraid of your failures, because that is part of feeding those giants every day. A disapproval of others. And I don't know how many times I have to emphasize to the people I talk to that it doesn't matter what somebody else thinks of you. It only matters what God thinks of you. We are never, ever going to be able to please a population of humans that are broken and insecure. Never, never, ever will we ever be able to do that. So let's don't try to do that anymore. Let's work to make God happy and not the people here on earth. And another quick story, and I know there's at least one person on this video that will, or the Zoom call that will know exactly who I'm talking about, but it's a very important story to tell. So when I was in Leadership Allen Fairview, and if you haven't been in leadership, you must take it. It's life-changing. But in our group, I think we had 20 to 24 people in our class, and we had that one person in our class that no matter what our class project was going to be, he always wanted to play what he called devil's advocate. He wanted to tell us why it would not work. And he constantly would shoot us down. We would come in with bright eyes and expectation to get all this work done so our class project would get done. And every single time it went from, hey, hallelujah, to, our heads were dragging and we didn't get our class project done. And it's very, very frustrating. As hard as I fought this person, I couldn't convince him. And then I realized I didn't have to. Why was I even caring? I've run across this person in 2 other business settings, and he's still the same person. And I finally resigned to the fact he's living his life the way he wants to. I'm not gonna be a party of that. So just remember that it doesn't matter what other people think. And I really want to emphasize Facebook posts, because there's been a lot of hatred, a lot of my way is right, your way is wrong. And we need to cleanse ourselves of that and stop that, because we're dragging ourselves down. And honestly, Satan loves the chaos. And so let's pull back on that. And the last thing, opposition from others, or the fight, is too tough. Others think that they have your best interests at heart, and they're going to give you their advice and information and opinion. And the thing that I really want to encourage you is to remember what God has done for us, because his past with us is always proven. The past we have with some of these people advising us is not proven. And I'll give you a very quick, another quick story was when I started my ministry, and I started my blog and I started my podcast. For many, many years, people heard me do my networking commercial on promotional products, and I educated people on, why it's good to give a promotional product. And it really came down to gratitude, because when you give somebody something, even what people call tchotchkes and trinkets, people feel important and they feel like they've gotten something of value. And when God blessed me with my ministry, I felt that way. I felt like I was given something of value that I could give to other people, and I could share hope and, these hearts that are so comforting to hold. I would find a way to pay for these and share these, because I wanted people to know not to lose faith in God, but also to know that I cared. You may not know me, but I care about you. My biggest fear was walking in to Tuesday Morning Live, and it would have been approximately March 19th of 2018, because I walked in and said, I'm Laurie LoLo Roberts with grateful gratitude. And it was something I hadn't ever said before in front of a group of 65 people. And as I said that, I saw people in the room shifting and all of a sudden talking to their neighbor as to what's going on, what's happening. And I walked in there and said, this is who I am. This is who I'm going to be. And Mark Friedman came over to me. Well, he's actually sitting at my table that day, and he said, I believe in you. You're going to do good things, and I get what you're doing. So the same way that people are going to tear you down, your friends and family and people around you, they're going to be people who lift you up and believe in you. Knowing God will always believe in you, but also recognize those around you that believe in you. Now I want to go back to David's stone, and I want to go to your stone. So if you have a gratitude heart, I want you to think of that as the stone that David picked up and defeated Goliath. If you have a gratitude stone and you have a giant in front of you, I want you to hold that and connect that to what David accomplished with one shot of that stone. And I want you to accomplish the same thing with your giants with just holding it one time and knowing you can do it. So that being said, I want to open for discussion and hear, what type of giants do you need to slay? Or does this make sense to you? Or what can I do to help you today with your giants?